You never forget the moment when the room goes silent, not because someone shouted, but because everyone just witnessed something so unexpected, so shocking, that not even the clinking of silverware or the whisper of designer fabric could fill the air. That was the exact moment the laughter stopped. A room full of elite executives, socialites, and influencers, all frozen mid-bite, mid-conversation, when the truth dropped like a bomb. Moments earlier, they were mocking a frail, dirt-streaked homeless woman who wandered into the ballroom like she didn't belong. But what they didn't know, what you're about to find out, is that she wasn't just anyone. She was the mother of not one, not two, but three of the richest tech executives in the country, each of them billionaires in their own right. And that lavish charity gala? It was in her honor, whether they realized it or not. You clicked on this video for answers, and trust me, what you're about to see will not only blow your mind, it'll change the way you look at people forever. Now, before we dive in, let me talk directly to you, the viewer. You've probably seen titles like this before, stories that promise shocking twists and emotional roller coasters. But this one's different. Because it's not just a story about riches, rags, and revenge. It's a psychological journey into human perception, bias, and the brutal price of assumptions. And I want you to walk through this with me, not just as a spectator, but as someone who's felt misunderstood, judged, or overlooked. Because let's be honest, haven't we all been there, even for a second? You've seen someone on the street and assumed their story. You've walked past someone and filled in the blanks without even realizing it. But what if those blanks held a truth more powerful than anything you imagined? So stay with me, not because I'm asking, but because you need to know how this ends. You need to see how a single moment can flip the script and reveal the raw, uncomfortable beauty of the human spirit. We're not just telling a tale, we're pulling back the curtain on something that happens every day in real life, behind closed doors, behind judgmental stares, and behind the polished filters of social media. By the end of this video, you'll not only know who she is, but you'll understand why she walked into that ballroom with nothing, and why she left with everything. Let's set the scene. Picture a luxurious hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Think chandeliers dripping with crystals, velvet ropes separating the VIPs from the rest, and champagne flutes that cost more than a night's stay at most motels. It's the annual Vision for the Future Gala, a who's who of Silicon Valley and Hollywood elites, gathered under one roof for a night of networking, philanthropy, and polished perfection. The media's outside, snapping shots of Teslas, Lamborghinis, and designer gowns. Inside, billionaires are exchanging laughs over foie gras and talking about their next venture capital project. No one's expecting the unexpected, because they've built a world where surprises don't belong. Then she enters. She's thin, almost skeletal, with matted gray hair and a patchy coat that hasn't seen a washing machine in months. Her eyes are sunken, not just from hunger, but from years of being invisible. She walks in slowly, quietly, her shoes worn down to nothing, her fingers trembling not from cold, but from memory. At first, people ignore her. Then someone notices. A waiter stiffens. A guest stifles a laugh. Murmurs ripple through the crowd like a virus. Security must have messed up. She wandered in from the street. Is this part of the entertainment? The laughter grows, casual at first, then cruel. Phones come out. TikToks are filmed. Hashtags are made. She becomes a spectacle in a room built for status. But here's the part you weren't supposed to see. Behind one of those high-profile executives, sipping from his custom-engraved whiskey glass, checking stock updates on his Apple Watch, his face goes pale. Another man across the room drops his fork. A third, the youngest of the bunch, suddenly stares at her like he's seen a ghost. One by one, their expressions change, not to disgust, not to embarrassment, but to recognition. Because this woman, shivering under the cold glare of 100 diamond-studded eyes, is the same woman who raised them, who sacrificed everything so they could become the very people now hosting this event. And in that moment, the room's entire atmosphere shifts. That laughter? Gone. That arrogance? Shattered. Because the truth is about to come crashing down, and not everyone is ready to face it. Now, I know what you're thinking. How does a homeless woman end up being the mother of millionaires? Why was she homeless to begin with? Why didn't her sons help her, or even recognize her at first? What kind of twist leads to such a heartbreaking reunion at an event that was supposed to celebrate success? All valid questions. And I promise you we're going to answer every single one, but only if you stay with me, because the next few minutes are where things get real.
Raw.
Emotional. And yes, absolutely unbelievable. This story is not just about poverty and wealth, it's about identity. About what happens when the people we love the most choose to forget who we are to fit into a world that values appearances over truth. It's about shame, ambition, regret, and ultimately redemption. We're talking about real human psychology here. The fear of being judged, the desire to belong, the quiet sacrifices made in the dark while others shine in the spotlight. These aren't just characters in a story. They're reflections of people we all know. Maybe even parts of ourselves. So who is she? Why did she show up tonight, of all nights? Was it fate? A final cry for help? Or a calculated decision to confront the children who once called her mom, but later erased her from their carefully curated lives? And what will happen when her truth is finally revealed? Not just to the guests, but to the world watching online live, because yes, someone had the brilliant idea to stream the whole thing for charity. What begins as humiliation quickly spirals into a reckoning no one could have prepared for. By the time this story reaches its climax, you'll see the media scramble to rewrite headlines, influencers desperately delete videos, and powerful men brought to their knees by a truth too heavy to ignore. But we're not there yet. Right now, you're in the eye of the storm, the quiet before everything explodes. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Because in the next few scenes, we're going to peel back the layers of her life, her past, and the secrets even her children tried to bury. You're about to find out why she ended up on the streets, and how her millionaire sons convinced the world they were self-made when they owed everything to the woman they abandoned. The twists ahead? You won't see them coming. The emotions? They'll hit you hard. And the ending? Let's just say it'll stay with you long after the video ends. So grab a seat. Lean in. Don't scroll away. Because now you're in it, and the truth is about to change everything you thought you knew. Just hours before she stepped into that ballroom, before the cameras captured her trembling frame, and before the entire internet began dissecting her presence, Eleanor Hartley had been curled up on a bench near a public library downtown. The sun hadn't risen yet, and her breath clouded in front of her with every exhale, each one a soft, painful whisper into the morning air. She clutched a worn tote bag filled with things that seemed meaningless to most but sacred to her, a faded photograph of 3 young boys standing in front of a small apartment complex, a half-torn letter with no return address, and a hospital bracelet that hadn't been removed since her last visit, where no one came to pick her up. Every morning she woke up like this. She told herself it would be different, that maybe today she'd be seen, that today someone would remember who she really was. But the world didn't work that way, not anymore. Not when your past had been carefully scrubbed from the narrative by the very people you raised to rise above it. Eleanor wasn't always invisible. In fact, once upon a time, she was the talk of her neighborhood, a single mother of 3 boys, working double shifts as a nurse and still managing to make cupcakes for the PTA meetings. Everyone knew her for her laughter, her fierce loyalty, and her refusal to give up even when life threw its worst at her. She taught her sons how to tie ties for job interviews, how to speak up when they believed something was wrong, and how to love unconditionally. But somewhere along the road, after her second eviction, after the layoffs, after the car broke down, and she couldn't make it to work on time, life took from her more than just comfort. It took her dignity. And one by one, the phone calls stopped. First came the silence from her oldest son, Ethan, who had once clung to her hand during thunderstorms, but now ran a multi-billion-dollar fintech company out of San Francisco. Then Julian, the middle child, brilliant, intense, emotionally distant, who revolutionized app-based AI learning but hadn't replied to her letters in years. And finally, Zach, her youngest, the kind one, the boy who cried watching documentaries about injustice. now a top executive at a global wellness startup that preached mindfulness while ignoring the call history that bore her name. The night before the gala, Eleanor had overheard two men talking near the back entrance of the library. One of them mentioned a massive event happening the next day at the Grand Sterling Hotel, a charity benefit for families in need. The irony wasn't lost on her. But what caught her attention wasn't just the word charity. It was the mention of a guest list featuring the Hartley brothers, tech's golden trio, who had built empires from what the media called nothing. That phrase always made her laugh, though not in a funny way, because she knew where they'd started. She'd been the starting line. She'd sacrificed dinner so they could eat, skipped doctor appointments so they could afford college textbooks, and sat in ER waiting rooms alone while they chased dreams she'd helped plant in their minds. That next morning, Eleanor made a decision. It wasn't grand or theatrical, it was quiet, instinctual. She washed her face in a gas station bathroom, tried to straighten her coat sleeves, and walked 24 blocks to the hotel. Not to make a scene. Not even to confront them. She just wanted to see them. To see if anything had changed. If they still remembered. If they'd even look at her. But what happened next wasn't what she expected. Not the security guard ignoring her completely. Not the waiter who asked if she was part of the social justice-themed skit. And certainly not the laughter that erupted when she reached for a glass of water, and her hand trembled so badly it knocked it over. What she didn't know, and what no one else in that ballroom did either, was that someone had been watching her long before she arrived. A man seated at the back, sipping slowly from a glass he never touched, his eyes following Eleanor's every move. He wasn't dressed like the others. His suit was slightly wrinkled, and he didn't wear a name tag. He hadn't applauded during the speeches, hadn't laughed during the cruel jokes. And while the rest of the room focused on Eleanor as an eyesore, he saw something else. A clue. A key. Maybe even a threat. Because you see, this wasn't just any gala. And Eleanor's appearance wasn't just an accident. The deeper you go into the story, the more you realize someone knew she'd come. And someone didn't want her to. Here's where things get murky. Earlier that week, rumors had started to circulate online about a tell-all blog post from an anonymous source claiming to have dirt on one of the Hartley brothers. The post was taken down within hours, but not before screenshots began circulating on Reddit and YouTube community pages. The claims were vague, something about abandoning the person who built the empire and hiding the truth to protect stock values. No names were mentioned, but those who followed the tech scene long enough began to piece things together. A few even speculated Eleanor herself might be the source, though no one could confirm it. She had no digital footprint, no bank records, not even an ID. As far as official records showed, Eleanor Hartley had ceased to exist nearly 7 years ago. But what if that was by design? As the night went on and whispers turned into tension, more strange details began to surface. A staff member at the hotel swore he saw Eleanor arguing with someone in the alley behind the venue hours before the gala. Another claimed he saw a black car circling the block 3 times before speeding off the moment she walked in. A former intern, now an investigative TikTok creator known for cracking real-time stories, posted a blurry photo of Eleanor talking to a man in a dark hoodie days before the event. And that man? He looked eerily similar to a long-disgraced investor with ties to one of the Hartley startups, someone who'd been ousted quietly years ago after a scandal that never made the news. At least, not the real news. So now we're left with more questions than answers. Was Eleanor just a grieving, desperate mother looking for her sons? Or was she carrying a secret powerful enough to bring an empire down? Were her sons truly unaware of her presence? Or were they scrambling to bury the truth before she could speak? And that man in the back of the ballroom, watching without blinking, was he a journalist, a stalker, a former ally, or something far worse? What's clear is this: someone is hiding something. And as the night unfolds, every smile starts to look like a mask. Every speech, a performance. And every decision made years ago is starting to surface in ways no one in that ballroom could have predicted. And just when you think you've figured it out, just when you start forming your theories and pointing fingers, someone pulls the fire alarm. But Eleanor doesn't move. And neither do her sons. Because whatever's about to happen next, None of them are ready. The fire alarm wasn't loud at first. It was a slow, rising beep, more annoying than alarming, but enough to cause murmurs to ripple through the room. Within seconds, staff scrambled toward exits, and guests began filing out in confusion, their sequined gowns and tailored tuxedos brushing against one another in the rush. The hotel manager's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, insisting it was likely a false trigger, but something about the timing felt off. Too precise. Too convenient. Because right before that alarm went off, Eleanor had been handed a folded napkin from a waiter who hadn't said a single word. Just slipped it into her trembling hand and walked away like nothing happened. The napkin was wrapped tightly like it was hiding something, and inside was a flash drive. Plain. Black. No label. And just 3 words written in rushed ink on the cloth. They know everything. She never had time to ask who gave it to her. The chaos that followed erased all chance of a calm exchange. People pushed past her, phones in hand, some still smirking, others annoyed their social calendar was being disrupted. One woman even asked Eleanor to move aside, calling her a distraction in a coat. But Eleanor wasn't thinking about that. Her eyes were locked on that tiny piece of plastic now burning a hole in her palm. This wasn't just a coincidence. Someone wanted her to find it, and someone else wanted to make sure she didn't get a chance to see what was on it. She turned toward the hallway, hoping to find a quiet corner, maybe a back office with a laptop, just long enough to peek at what the drive contained. But within minutes, she realized the hotel was being cleared faster than protocol would suggest. Security was directing people with sharp precision, almost as if they'd been trained for this very moment. That's when she felt it, a hand on her shoulder, firm but not aggressive. "You need to go," the voice said, low and urgent. Eleanor turned to face a woman in her 30s, stylish but not flashy, wearing a small gold pin in the shape of an owl. Her name tag read Marla. She didn't work there. Eleanor could tell. The woman looked her directly in the eyes, and in that moment, Eleanor saw something that chilled her deeper than the cold outside, the look of someone who knew exactly who she was. "You're not safe here," Marla whispered, her voice calm but intense. "They're going to bury it. The moment you walk out that door, they'll erase everything." She gestured subtly toward the flash drive. "That's not the only copy. But it's the one that matters now. If you want answers, don't go to the cops. Don't call your sons. Not yet. Meet me at the 5th Street train station. Platform B, midnight." Then, just like that, she vanished into the crowd. Eleanor didn't even have time to process it. By the time she reached the lobby, staff were already asking people to step outside. Sirens wailed in the distance. The street was lit up with flashing lights. "An electrical panel," someone said. "A short circuit. Nothing serious. Just protocol." But Eleanor knew better. She'd seen that look before. Calculated calm hiding chaos. She ducked into a side hallway, avoiding the main exit, and found herself in a dim corridor filled with storage crates and service carts. She moved fast, her instincts sharper than she remembered. Years of surviving on the streets had taught her how to move unnoticed. She found a service elevator, hit the down button, and clutched the flash drive like it was her only lifeline. Because maybe it was. By the time she slipped out through a side entrance and made it to a quiet street corner, the crowd had already gathered near the main exit. Camera crews were showing up. The live stream had been cut during the alarm, but clips were already going viral under hashtags like #ballroomintruder and #Gallagate. No one knew her name, not yet. But if she wasn't careful, that would change fast. And once it did, the narrative would be controlled by people who had everything to lose and the money to make the truth disappear. She made her way to a nearby public library, one of the few places left in the city where you could still use a computer without getting side-eyed. The building was closing soon, but she convinced the security guard to let her stay for 10 minutes. When she finally plugged the flash drive into a desktop tower that hummed with age, the screen flickered to life. The folder on the drive was locked. Encrypted. But there was a media file labeled simply 1998. She clicked on it, and what played next was a grainy video that made her stomach twist. It was a courtroom, a deposition, based on the timestamp. Seated at the table was a much younger Eleanor, wearing a nurse's uniform, visibly shaken. Across from her sat a man in a slick gray suit, tapping his pen aggressively. The audio was crackled, but clear enough. She knew about the data breach, the voice said. She reported it. Then they fired her. You're saying this was retaliation? She had proof. They destroyed it. But she mailed copies to someone she trusted. Eleanor's fingers froze over the mouse. She remembered now. A medical tech scandal. A biotech company she'd worked for briefly, just before things spiraled. They'd been testing faulty equipment on vulnerable patients. She'd found discrepancies, spoke up, and was fired 2 days later. At the time, she thought it was over. But apparently it wasn't. And the company? It had quietly dissolved, then rebranded. Bought out. Absorbed by a new firm. A firm founded by her sons. Suddenly the room spun. She stepped back from the monitor, her pulse thudding in her ears. That flash drive didn't just contain dirt. It contained the origin of their empire. The very foundation of their success, built on stolen ethics and corporate betrayal. Someone knew she had uncovered the link. And someone didn't want the past dragged into the spotlight. Then the screen went black. The computer shut down on its own. Power failure? Remote wipe? She wasn't sure. But one thing was clear. The evidence had disappeared.
Just like that.
Gone before she could back it up, email it, or even take a photo. The flash drive was still warm but empty now. All files erased. She looked around. The library was nearly deserted. But as she turned to leave, she saw something that made her stop cold. Outside, across the street, under a flickering lamppost, Marla was standing there, watching. Not alone this time. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't waving. And behind her stood a man Eleanor hadn't seen in over 2 decades, someone she once trusted with her life. The same man who had destroyed it. Rain had begun to fall in thin, deliberate streaks by the time Eleanor stepped out of the library and caught sight of Marla and the man beside her. The lamppost above them buzzed and flickered, casting an eerie yellow hue over the sidewalk like a stage light revealing the final act of a play. Only this act was far from over. Eleanor's breath caught as her eyes locked with the man's. His name hadn't been uttered in years, not in her mind and certainly not out loud, but his face was unmistakable. Gerald Knox, a former research director at the biotech firm where Eleanor once worked. A man who had been both mentor and friend before becoming something much more dangerous. He had vanished after the scandal, after the whistleblower lawsuit disappeared into settlement silence, and now here he was, standing like a phantom outside a public library in the middle of downtown, beside the only woman who'd shown Eleanor any sign of trust. Eleanor took a cautious step backward, her instincts screaming that this was no reunion. Knox's expression didn't hold apology or surprise. It was unreadable, professional, cold, measured. Marla, on the other hand, gave the slightest shake of her head, almost imperceptible, as if warning Eleanor not to approach. But it was too late. A black SUV turned the corner behind her and eased slowly along the curb, its tinted windows watching like eyes without faces. Eleanor slipped the dead flash drive into her coat pocket and turned sharply down the alley, her feet splashing through shallow puddles as she vanished into the shadows before either of them could speak. Whatever they wanted from her, or whatever they feared she knew, it would have to wait. She needed to regroup.
Think. Breathe.
And most importantly, find out who else was involved because clearly she wasn't the only one being watched. 10 miles away, in a sleek penthouse overlooking the city skyline, Julian Hartley was pouring himself a second glass of whiskey, the kind he only brought out when old memories clawed their way to the surface. He hadn't seen the live stream of the gala. He'd been too preoccupied pacing his office, staring at the framed magazine covers that featured him as a self-made visionary, wondering how long the illusion would last. But then his phone buzzed with a notification he couldn't ignore, an encrypted message from a source he didn't recognize, with a single sentence. She remembers everything. Attached was a blurry still from the gala's live feed, his mother, standing near the stage, eyes wide, body hunched, unmistakable. He hadn't spoken to her in nearly a decade. He told himself it was for her safety. that they'd all agreed it was better this way. But deep down, he knew the truth. They'd left her behind because she was inconvenient, because success had a short memory and an even shorter fuse. He tried to forward the message, but it vanished before he could hit send. Auto-deleted. The sender had covered their tracks. He tapped into the company's internal surveillance systems, tech no one outside their team even knew existed, and tried to pull data from the Gala servers. But something was wrong. Entire security logs had been wiped, replaced by looped footage that didn't match the night's timeline. Someone had tampered with the data. Not just scrubbed it, but reconstructed it. That level of infiltration wasn't random. It was personal, which meant someone on the inside had helped, or someone outside had learned how to use their own system against them. He poured the rest of the whiskey into the sink and picked up his phone. Meanwhile, across town in a quiet suburb, Zach Hartley was putting his daughter to bed when his phone rang. It was a burner, one he kept locked in a drawer and hadn't touched in months. He let it ring twice, 3 times, then answered without a word. On the other end, static. Then a voice he hadn't heard in years. "She's awake, Zachary. And she's looking for the truth." His stomach dropped. "If you care about her, you'll stop her before she gets too close. We both know what happens if she opens that door again." The line went dead before he could respond. He stood there, frozen, his daughter's soft breathing barely audible over the pounding in his ears. The past wasn't just resurfacing, it was circling, like a storm with no eye, threatening to destroy everything they had built. But what made the situation even more confusing and terrifying was what happened next. In a dusty file archive beneath the building of a nonprofit newspaper Eleanor had once written to out of desperation, a junior intern named Lena discovered an old envelope marked, "Return to sender." It had been lost behind a cabinet for years, sealed but never opened, with Eleanor's name scrawled across the front in ink that had faded to a whisper. Curious, Lena opened it, only to find a letter dated 8 years ago and a photograph. The letter was a plea from Eleanor, sent during the time she was losing her job, her home, her health. It named names, dates, facilities. And in the photo, something that didn't make sense. A young Ethan Hartley, her eldest, standing beside a much older man, holding a blueprint with a logo that didn't match any company they were known to have founded. The company's name? Virtu's Systems. A firm supposedly dissolved in 1999 after its founders disappeared amid rumors of human trials gone wrong. Lena posted a thread on X, formerly Twitter, asking if anyone knew what Virtu's Systems really did. Within hours, the post had gone viral under hashtag Virtu's Files, and amateur sleuths began digging. Some found connections between Virtu's and a shadowy shell corporation that later invested in the Hartley brothers' first big launch. Others traced Virtu's to a government medical contract that mysteriously ended after 1 year. No hard evidence yet, just threads, speculation, and screenshots, but it was enough to rattle the internet and get people asking questions. Back on the streets, Eleanor kept moving. She didn't trust Marla, not completely. Not anymore. If Marla was working with Knox, or worse, pretending not to, then Eleanor was already a pawn in a much bigger game. And yet something about Marla's earlier urgency still lingered in her mind. Was she trying to protect her? Or was she steering her away from the real truth? Every person Eleanor encountered now seemed like a suspect, every act of kindness a potential setup. She couldn't even trust her own memories, not after everything she'd been through. But she had to keep going. She had to know what they'd done, what they'd buried, and why, after all these years, it was suddenly rising to the surface. Then, as she stepped into the stairwell of an abandoned apartment complex she once called home, her foot landed on something soft. She looked down. Another envelope. No postage. No address. Just one word written in red marker across the front. Liar. Eleanor stared at the envelope like it was pulsing in her hands. The red ink wasn't smudged. It looked fresh, as if someone had written it just moments before she arrived. Her fingers trembled as she turned it over, half expecting a bomb or poison, but it was light, just paper inside. Carefully, she opened the flap and pulled out a single sheet. No signature, no greeting, just a message printed in block letters. You should have stayed gone. Her breath caught in her throat. Her chest felt tight, as if invisible hands were pressing down, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something worse than fear. It was certainty. Certainty that someone had been watching her, that she had triggered something by being seen again. Her past wasn't just resurfacing, it was actively hunting her now. And whoever was behind it was done playing games. She backed away slowly, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the distant city sounds. The stairwell reeked of mildew and rusted metal, and for a split second, she was no longer the woman who had survived sleeping on subways and eating from trash bins. She was just a mother, one who had loved fiercely, who had once believed in right and wrong, and who had lost everything trying to stand on the right side of a lie. But the truth had never saved her. And now it might kill her. She shoved the note into her coat and left the building through the rear entrance, avoiding the main street entirely. She could feel eyes on her, no proof, just the gut-deep awareness you earn from years of surviving in places that don't offer second chances. Her plan was to take the long way to the train station, avoid public roads, cut through the park. But as she crossed the shadowed path near a fenced-in lot, she heard footsteps. Not a random pedestrian shuffle.
No.
This was different.
Slow.
Intentional. She stopped. The steps stopped. She moved again.
So did they.
She spun around, but the path behind her was empty. Still, that bone-deep instinct was screaming louder now. She reached into her pocket and gripped the old keychain flashlight she carried for emergencies. The bulb was dim, but enough to light the trail for a few feet ahead. That's when she saw it. Graffiti sprayed across the wall of a maintenance shed just off the path. She hadn't noticed it before, but it chilled her when she read it. Mother of lies. Someone was mocking her. Or warning her. Or both. She turned quickly and broke into a fast walk, resisting the urge to run. Running made you look scared. Made you pray. But every hair on her neck stood up as she reached the far end of the park and ducked into a row of empty bus shelters. Her plan to regroup, to wait for midnight at the train station, was unraveling fast. She needed help. Not just Marla, not her sons. She needed someone with nothing to lose. Someone outside the system. That's when she remembered Paul. Paul Banner had been a freelance journalist once. Good, ethical, stubborn. He had believed her back when no one else did. He'd helped her file the original whistleblower claim. After the case was buried, he disappeared too, supposedly moved to Portland, started a food blog of all things. But she'd heard rumors he was still digging, still following trails no one else wanted to touch. If he was still in the city, he might be her only real shot at getting the truth out before it was buried again, this time with her along for the ride. She used an old burner phone to search for recent mentions of his name and found something curious. A podcast. A single, obscure episode uploaded just a week ago under a pseudonym, but the voice was unmistakably Paul. In the episode, he talked about a biotech trail leading back to the same money that built half of Silicon Valley. He never mentioned names, but he hinted at a family foundation tied to a defunct medical company and a series of sealed lawsuits stretching back to the late 90s. Eleanor's heart sank. He was still chasing the ghost she'd tried to expose. And now he might be in danger because of her. She jotted down the episode title, Echoes of Virtus, and checked the upload location metadata. Midtown. Only a few blocks from where she was now. It was risky, but she had to find him. As she made her way through the side streets, her paranoia grew heavier, more suffocating. Every shadow looked like a figure. Every passerby seemed to slow when they looked at her. Even the street cameras felt like they were shifting to follow her steps. She ducked into a laundromat, pretending to make a call, and caught a reflection in the mirror behind the detergent rack.
A man.
Unfamiliar. Watching her from across the street. Not moving.
Just standing.
His posture wasn't casual, he was waiting. Maybe for her to leave. Maybe for confirmation. She left through the back exit and changed direction immediately. By the time she reached the alley behind the podcast studio, the place was silent. No lights. The door was slightly open. She paused, then pushed it with the sleeve of her coat. The office was wrecked, papers scattered, Chairs overturned, recording equipment unplugged. Not vandalized. Searched. Torn apart with precision. But what shattered her the most was the voicemail machine blinking red. Out of impulse, she hit play. Paul's voice cracked through the speaker, rushed and anxious. "If you get this, Elle, don't go back to the station. It's a trap.
They know about the envelope.
They've known for weeks. I thought I had more time." The message cut off. Static followed. Then silence. Eleanor stood frozen in the wreckage of truth, feeling the walls close in. If Paul was gone, she had no safety net. No more proof. No allies she could trust. She was now at the center of a storm she had once tried to escape, and the walls were closing in faster than she could run. That's when her phone buzzed again. One photo. No text. It was her youngest son, Adam, taken tonight. Standing alone on a balcony. And, in the reflection of the window behind him, a figure she recognized. Gerald Knox. The moment Eleanor saw Adam's face on her phone screen, her knees buckled beneath her, and she had to steady herself against the cracked wall beside the alley. Her first instinct was to run, to find him, to scream for help even though no one was listening. But it was the reflection, the blurred but unmistakable shape of Gerald Knox behind him, that turned her blood to ice. Knox wasn't just reappearing to haunt her. He was orchestrating something. Something larger than she had ever imagined. And now her youngest, the most private of her sons, the one who had never chased the spotlight, was caught in the middle. She didn't know where the photo had been taken. She didn't know who had sent it. But one thing was now violently, undeniably clear. The past hadn't just returned to confront her. It had wrapped itself around her children like a noose. She backed out of the alley and took off toward the main road, ducking into a cab and instructing the driver to take her to Adam's apartment downtown. Her mind was racing, searching through every memory, every moment from years ago that might connect to this new nightmare. But the puzzle didn't come together. It only fractured further with each breath. When she finally reached Adam's building and forced her way inside, the doorman tried to stop her, but she barreled through, adrenaline muting every voice except the one screaming inside her head. Up the elevator, down the hall, heart in her throat. She pounded on his door until it creaked open slightly, unlocked. That alone was wrong. Adam was meticulous about his security. The apartment was quiet.
Clean.
Too clean. A steaming mug of coffee sat untouched on the table, the kind he only made when he couldn't sleep. His laptop was still open, a spreadsheet of encrypted data on the screen. Lines of code Eleanor couldn't begin to decipher. But then she saw it, an open browser window behind the spreadsheet, with a paused video feed. It was a surveillance camera, but not from outside the building. It was a live stream from a lab. One Eleanor recognized. Her knees went weak again. The old Virtus Systems lab. It wasn't demolished like they had said. It had been converted, reinvented, hidden behind layers of shell companies, private investors, and new branding. But the architecture was the same, and worse, the lab wasn't abandoned. Figures moved in and out of frame, wearing scrubs, gloves, headsets. Monitors flashed biometric data. One camera angle revealed a chamber filled with what looked like cryopods. It was straight out of a sci-fi nightmare. Only this was real. She looked around the apartment, suddenly aware of how quiet it was.
Too quiet.
And then she saw it, a note taped under the desk, where only someone who knew Adam's habits would look. She pulled it loose and unfolded it slowly, hands trembling. It was written in Adam's handwriting, rushed, uneven. "Mom, if you're reading this, then I've disappeared. But I didn't run. I went back because I had to know the truth. About Dad. About the project. About why you left. I found the files. He didn't die like we were told. He wasn't buried. I think he's still alive. Or something close to it. Don't trust Julian. Don't trust Zach. They knew. They always knew." The words hit Eleanor like a blunt force trauma to the chest. She gasped, falling backward into the chair as tears filled her eyes. All these years she had believed her husband, David Hartley, had died in a car crash while trying to expose the truth about Virtus. That's what the autopsy report said. That's what the closed casket had meant. But if Adam was right, if David had been kept somewhere, possibly in that lab, or worse, used as some kind of prototype in the very experiments he tried to stop, then everything she thought she knew was a lie. And suddenly, the pieces began to fall into place. Not neatly, not cleanly, but chaotically, like someone had thrown the whole puzzle into the air. What if her sons hadn't just abandoned her to climb the corporate ladder? What if they had been protecting her from this? What if their success wasn't solely ambition, but also guilt and survival? And Marla, was she trying to warn her or delay her from discovering this exact secret? Then there was Knox. He had worked alongside David in the early days of Virtus. He had disappeared after the lab was exposed. What if he hadn't been hiding from prosecution, but running the operation all along? Before Eleanor could gather her thoughts, her phone vibrated again. Another photo. This time it was a security cam, still grainy but clear enough. It showed Eleanor herself walking through the park from earlier that night. Behind her, no more than 30 feet, a second figure trailing her. But what made her scream wasn't the shadow. It was the timestamp. The photo was taken 3 hours before she'd even entered the park. She had been watched long before she knew it, which meant someone was manipulating the timeline, feeding her a false narrative, giving her just enough truth to make her chase the bait, but never enough to understand what she was chasing. And that someone, somehow, had access not only to surveillance footage, but to her movements, her contacts, her thoughts. She stared at the photo, then back at the paused surveillance feed from the lab. One of the figures now stood still, directly in front of the camera, as if watching her watch them. Then, the figure slowly lifted one hand and tapped the lens with their finger. The screen went black. Eleanor's world was officially turned inside out. Eleanor sat motionless, her pulse thundering in her ears as the screen in front of her went black. The silence in Adam's apartment wasn't just unnerving. It felt staged, like a vacuum designed to trap her inside her own spiraling thoughts. Her son was missing. The lab she thought was long buried was not only active, but possibly central to a horrifying secret. Her husband, long mourned and grieved, might be alive, or at least not buried like they told her. And now, someone was sending her images taken before she even stepped into a location, tracking her movements with impossible precision. She was in a trap, so deep she couldn't even tell which way was up anymore. But the most devastating blow wasn't the photo, or the surveillance feed, or even Adam's cryptic note. It was the single name he had written with shaky certainty at the bottom of the message. Don't trust Julian. Julian, her middle son. The peacemaker. The one who had begged her not to go public all those years ago. The one who had visited her in shelters in secret, slipping her cash and groceries when no one was looking. The only one who ever looked her in the eyes without shame. That Julian. The idea that he knew something worse, that he might have played a role in covering it up, cut deeper than any threat, any surveillance, any corporate betrayal. She had nothing left to cling to now. No one to fully trust. And the weight of that realization was like drowning in a room with no windows, no doors, just a flood that rose with every breath. She had to confront him. It was the only way forward. She didn't even know if he'd take her call, but she tried anyway. No answer. She called again. And again. Finally, a text popped up. Can't talk. Meet me at the pier. 30 minutes. Come alone. No emojis. No warmth. Just cold, flat instruction. She took a cab, scanning the streets along the way, her mind racing through every conversation, every subtle hesitation in his voice, every time he'd avoided questions about the past. Had he always known? Had he been protecting her, or protecting the secret? When she arrived at the pier, the place was near deserted. Only a few stragglers walking dogs or staring at their phones. Julian stood at the far end, leaning against the railing like he had 100 times when he was a boy, back when he believed everything could be fixed if you just looked out far enough, waited long enough, prayed hard enough. She approached slowly, watching his profile, waiting for him to look at her.
He didn't.
Adam's gone, she said quietly. I know, Julian replied, still not turning. You knew this would happen? I knew he was getting close, he said, his voice low and unreadable. I tried to stop him. She swallowed the lump in her throat. You wrote that report for the board, didn't you? The one claiming Virtus was irreversibly damaged and beyond any moral salvage. That report shut everything down. I thought you were on my side. Julian turned then, his eyes bloodshot and exhausted. I was on everyone's side. That was the problem. I thought I could protect the family and bury the truth at the same time. But it's not buried, Mom. It never was. You were right. Dad didn't die the way they said. They kept him. They used him. But you can't imagine what they turned him into. Eleanor felt like her lungs had been punched empty. So you knew? All this time you knew? I knew enough to be terrified of what I didn't know, he replied. We all did. Zach too. Zach, she repeated. He was just a kid when it happened. He was old enough to remember the night they came for Dad, Julian said bitterly. He saw them take him.
We told him it was just a bad dream.
But he never forgot. He grew up with that nightmare, and it twisted him. That's why he got involved with the biotech firms. He was trying to undo it, replicate it, control it. Eleanor turned away, trying to process the betrayal. Her sons weren't just hiding secrets. They were living inside them. And now Adam was missing, possibly held inside that same lab where their father had vanished. She looked back at Julian, suddenly furious. Why didn't you tell me any of this? You let me suffer on the streets for years while you sat in boardrooms and smiled for cameras. I didn't think you'd make it out alive if you knew, he snapped, the mask finally slipping. The people funding that research, Knox, others you haven't even heard of, they killed to protect what they built. If you'd come near it, they would have buried you without a name. Then why now? She asked. Why bring me in now? Julian hesitated, then pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat. Because there's a protocol embedded in Adam's code. A failsafe. If he disappears, it triggers a cascade that exposes everything. Files, recordings, names, locations. He built it himself. It's buried inside one of his algorithms, hidden in plain sight. But to unlock it, you need one more key. And it's in Dad's blood. Eleanor stared at him, the truth unraveling faster than she could absorb it. What are you saying? I'm saying the thing inside that lab, it's not just Dad's body. It's his DNA, his memory, possibly even his consciousness. They call it Project Genesis. It's experimental, unstable, and Adam thought it held the answers to everything. She shook her head, horrified. You expect me to believe they turned your father into some kind of living server? I don't expect you to believe anything, Julian said quietly. I just expect you to choose. Eleanor blinked. Choose what? They know you're back, he said. They know you've seen the footage. They'll give you a deal. Walk away now, and they'll let Adam live. Or you keep pushing, and everything burns. Including you. She took a step back, breath shallow, heart racing. How can you even say that? He's your brother. I'm not saying I'll take the deal, Julian said. I'm saying you will have to. They want you to confirm in writing that the original Virtus files were fabricated, that the whistleblower report was a delusion. They want your signature. And in return, they let Adam go. They bury Project Genesis forever. The end. Eleanor felt like she was drowning in betrayal. Her son was offering her a choice that wasn't a choice. Sacrifice the truth, or sacrifice her family. Either way, someone would be lost. Her head throbbed with the weight of the decision, and yet a voice inside her, a mother's voice, not a whistleblower's, kept whispering, What would you do to save your child? Julian reached for her hand, but she pulled it away. I'll give you until tomorrow, he said. Then the deal disappears. He walked away, leaving her at the edge of the pier, alone with the rising tide and a decision that could tear the world in half. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. Every minute that ticked by in the dark brought new spirals of panic, new questions, and the crushing weight of a choice she could no longer avoid. The document Julian had given her sat on the kitchen counter of the tiny motel room she had fled to. The deal, her silence in exchange for Adam's life, was there in writing, slick with legal language, buried under layers of corporate confidentiality clauses and non-disclosure agreements, so thick they might as well have been concrete walls. But what haunted her wasn't the document. It was the truth behind it. This wasn't just about Virtus anymore. It wasn't just about her family. This was a machine, a network, an entire infrastructure built on silence, power, and manipulation. And it had its hands in places she'd never imagined. As the sun began to rise, casting a weak orange light through the thin curtains, Eleanor opened her laptop and began to dig. She followed the breadcrumb trail Adam had left behind, code buried in email drafts, dummy accounts linking to dark web servers, file names disguised as song titles. Each one cracked open a new layer, a new horror. Virtus hadn't just experimented with cognitive transfers and biotech evolution. They had gone global. Eleanor uncovered communications between Knox and defense contractors, pharmaceutical giants, even a few figures that had sat on televised panels just last week, touting bioresilience and next-gen neural networks as solutions for aging populations and combat trauma. She traced money trails that flowed into educational research programs, supposedly ethical tech startups, and private clinics offering elite treatments to the ultra-wealthy. Virtus hadn't died, it had metastasized. The deeper she went, the clearer the picture became. Her husband had been one of the first human trials. Not the only one. The cryopods she saw on the surveillance feed? They weren't for storing dead tissue. They were for active data farms, bodies used like servers, brains repurposed for cognitive processing. It was a modern horror story playing out in the background of everyday life, hidden by clean branding and philanthropic lies. And worst of all, someone she never suspected had been feeding that machine the entire time. Marla, the woman who had found her that night in the alley, who had sat with her and shared a meal, who had begged her not to go digging too deep. It had felt like concern, then even kindness. But now Eleanor saw it clearly. Marla hadn't just been a friend. She had been planted. A watcher. A handler. Her name appeared in the funding records for a nonprofit listed as a communications intermediary. That nonprofit was receiving monthly deposits from a shell company linked directly to the rebranded Virtus lab. Eleanor's breath caught as she stared at the documents. It wasn't just betrayal. It was orchestration. They'd known she would come back the moment Adam disappeared. They'd prepared for it. And then her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time it wasn't a photo, it was a live video feed. Adam. Hooked to machines, barely conscious, but alive. Wires ran from his temples, his chest, his hands. Behind him, a screen displayed biometric readings that pulsed in erratic waves. And then the camera shifted, revealing a face she hadn't seen in over 2 decades. David. Or what was left of him. He was older, yes, but not like he had aged. He looked preserved, manufactured even. His eyes were sharp but distant, like a machine that remembered being a man. His voice, when it came, was distorted through an audio processor. Eleanor, he said. You should have stayed gone. She screamed. The camera cut out. Eleanor stood frozen, heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. David was alive. But he wasn't her husband anymore. He had become part of the machine, maybe willingly, maybe not, but now he was the key to everything. The files. The project. The people behind it. And someone wanted her to see him. Someone wanted to push her to the edge. And they succeeded. 10 minutes later, she was in a stolen car headed to the address Julian had marked for the off-site lab. She didn't know what she was going to do when she got there. She just knew she couldn't sign that paper. She couldn't let Adam become another ghost in a lab filled with husks of the people she once loved. But as she sped down the highway, headlights in her rearview mirror began to multiply. Black SUVs. No plates. Closing fast. They knew she'd made her choice. And now, they were coming for her. Eleanor's hands shook violently as she gripped the steering wheel. The engine of the stolen car hummed loudly, tires screeching against the pavement as she pushed it to its limits. The black SUVs in her rearview mirror were no longer a distant threat. They were closing in like predators. Her pulse surged with terror, but there was no time to panic. No time to think about the danger behind her. Her mind was racing through everything. Every clue, every moment of doubt, every time she thought she had lost control, only to find another piece of the puzzle fall into place. The lab, her husband, her sons, the files, Julian's cryptic warning. It was all here, converging in one final moment. The secrets buried by Virtus were about to come to light. The truth would either save her or end her. Her eyes darted from the road to the rearview mirror, where she saw the first of the SUVs lining up behind her. The black windows didn't give away the driver's face, but she didn't need to see it. She knew who was in that car. She had been running from them all this time. They were finally closing in. The people responsible for turning her family into pawns in their twisted game were right on her tail. And she couldn't run anymore. The car ahead of her came into view, the dim glow of lights illuminating a stark concrete building at the end of a desolate industrial stretch. The off-site lab. This was it. This was the place where Adam was being held, where her husband's body had been turned into something monstrous. She had to make it there. She had to destroy whatever it was they were building, or they would come after her son. They would come after everyone. Her mind locked on the building. This was her only chance. As the car skidded to a halt in front of the large steel doors, Eleanor didn't think twice. She threw the door open, ignoring the pain in her side as she sprinted toward the entrance. But she didn't make it far. The SUVs were there, surrounding her in seconds, doors opening, men in black suits spilling out, their faces unreadable, cold, calculating. She froze, her heart hammering. They had her. She was trapped. But then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, a familiar, terrifying figure. Julian. He stepped toward her, his eyes dark with something she couldn't decipher. "I told you it wouldn't end well, Mom," he said, his voice filled with regret, but there was something else behind it. Something she couldn't quite place. "What have you done?" Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. "You're part of this, Julian? After everything we've been through?" "After everything you've been through," he corrected, his gaze never leaving hers. "This isn't just about you anymore. You were always part of the plan. You just didn't know it." She felt a cold wave of realization wash over her. It wasn't just about Adam. It wasn't just about her family. This was bigger than anything she had imagined. They had all been part of it. The deals, the research, the experiments, everything had been a means to an end. And Julian had been in the center of it all. "I didn't want this," Julian said, his voice cracking as if he was trying to hold himself together. "I didn't want you to get caught up in it. But you were always the key. You're not just a mother, you're genetic code. It's crucial to the next phase of Project Genesis." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. Her blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice rising with a mixture of panic and anger. "It's not just about preserving life, Eleanor," he said, his voice almost sorrowful now. "It's about controlling it. And you, your genes, your connection to Adam, and to what happened to your husband, you were the missing link. Project Genesis isn't about resurrection. It's about evolution. They've been trying to create a race of people who live forever. But they couldn't get the formula right. Not until they found you." Eleanor's mind raced. Everything that had happened, all the betrayal, all the secrecy, it had been orchestrated around her. She had been a pawn without knowing it. And worse, her sons had been playing along, trapped in a system they couldn't escape. The realization was like acid eating away at her insides. But before she could say anything more, Julian stepped forward, his eyes locked on hers with a mix of anger and desperation. "You don't understand. You're standing in the middle of a war, Eleanor. The people behind Virtus, they don't just want your family, they want the future. They think they can use you to secure it, to make sure they control it all. Adam's the key to everything, and so are you." As he spoke, the world seemed to tilt, the air becoming thicker, heavier, almost suffocating. In that moment, everything came crashing down on her. The conspiracy wasn't just about money or power, it was about immortality. It was about taking something so precious, so irreplaceable, and turning it into a commodity. But then, just as she thought she had it all figured out, everything changed in an instant. A scream shattered the tension, and Eleanor whipped around to see a figure stumbling toward them from the shadows of the lab. It was Adam. He was alive. His hair was messy, his clothes disheveled, but his eyes were wide, desperate. "Mom," he shouted, rushing toward her, but his voice was filled with panic. "It's a trap. Get out of here, now." Before she could react, the sound of gunshots rang out, followed by the sharp clang of metal doors slamming shut. The building had been rigged, locked down, and suddenly, the air was filled with chaos. The black-suited men moved in quickly, and Eleanor's body went into autopilot, instincts kicking in as she pulled Adam close, pushing him toward a side exit. Julian's face twisted with rage. "You don't understand," he screamed at them, his voice now frantic. "This is bigger than all of us. You can't run from it." But Eleanor wasn't listening anymore. She could feel her heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through her as she pulled Adam along, determined to escape, to fight for her family, no matter the cost. Then, just as they reached the exit, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Marla. Her face was calm, eerily so, but her eyes were cold, betrayal incarnate. "You think you can run?" Marla asked, her voice soft but deadly. "You've been running from this your whole life, Eleanor. But it's time to face the truth. This is your legacy. Your family's legacy. There's no escaping it." Eleanor's breath hitched, and in that moment, the floor dropped out from beneath her. The truth, the horrifying, crushing truth, was that there was no way out. They had all been caught in this web, whether they liked it or not. She had thought she could save her family. But now, as the walls closed in around her, she realized that the price for the truth was far steeper than she had ever imagined. And in the silence that followed, as she faced the cold gaze of her once trusted friend, one question echoed in her mind. How far would she go to save the people she loved from the hell they'd created? The door slammed shut behind her, and everything went black. The world outside the sterile white walls of the facility felt distant, as though Eleanor had been transported to a place where time no longer held meaning. Her pulse was steady now, but the weight of what had happened settled deep into her bones. Adam was safe, for now. The black SUVs, the men in suits, the betrayals, it all felt like a terrible dream, yet the scars it had left behind were real. She sat in the small, nondescript room they had given her, the door locked behind her, but her thoughts were far from the security of the walls. The truth she had uncovered about Virtus, about the twisted labyrinth of corruption that had entangled her family, still haunted her. But there was something else too, an unsettling realization that no matter how far she ran, how many secrets she unearthed, there would always be more. The people behind Project Genesis were not just going to vanish. They were too entrenched, too powerful, and the conspiracy was too vast to be crushed by one person's actions. Her mind flickered back to the moment she had confronted Julian, the raw desperation in his eyes when he'd begged her to understand. She had wanted to believe that he was just a victim of something bigger, that perhaps there was a way to save him, to pull him back from the edge. But the truth was, Julian had made his choice long ago. He was as much a part of the machine as the people who pulled the strings behind Virtus, and nothing she could do would change that. The betrayal cut deeper than anything she had ever experienced, and yet, in a way, it had set her free. It had given her clarity. Adam, though still shaken, was stronger than she had thought. The moment they had escaped, he had taken the lead, determined to help his mother find the truth despite the danger. And in that moment, Eleanor saw the glimmer of the man he could become, a man who would never let the darkness of his past consume him. It gave her hope, something she had long forgotten in the whirlwind of lies and manipulation. The escape had been harrowing, but they had made it out. They were free, and for the first time in weeks, Eleanor allowed herself to breathe deeply, knowing that they had survived the storm. But even as she sat there in the dim room, trying to process everything that had happened, a gnawing thought lingered at the edge of her consciousness. She could feel it, an unease that wasn't going to go away, not this time. There was no sense of closure here, not yet. The world outside still pulsed with the dark energy of the forces they had uncovered, and it was impossible to imagine that all of it had been eradicated in one night. She had stopped them, for now, but the wheels of the conspiracy were still turning. The men behind Virtus weren't done. They never were. She stood up, her legs a little unsteady, and walked to the small window. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor, but the view outside was blank. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything was leading to something bigger, something she hadn't yet understood. As she stared into the distance, her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat, fear and caution surging through her. She hesitated for only a moment before answering, the sound of her breath heavy in the quiet room. "Eleanor," a familiar voice said, cool and unbothered. "I think you've made a mistake. You're not out of this yet." It was Marla. Eleanor's blood ran cold as the words settled into her mind. Marla had known. She had always known. And now, with the touch of her voice over the phone, Eleanor felt the weight of everything she had learned pressing down on her again. Marla wasn't just an ally. She was part of something else, something bigger, something darker that had yet to fully unfold. But what was it? What was Marla's true role in all of this? "I suggest you reconsider your next move, Eleanor," Marla continued, her tone thick with something Eleanor couldn't quite place. "You've only scratched the surface. There's more to this than you'll ever know." And with that, the call ended. Eleanor stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear, her mind spinning. She had been so sure. She had thought that by uncovering the truth, by running, by breaking the chains, she could escape. But now she realized the battle was far from over. The story she had stumbled into wasn't a story about a lab, a corporation, or even her family. It was a war for control, for power, for the future. And it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the weight of it all hit her, Eleanor took a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs, knowing that the fight for her family, for Adam, was just beginning. The conspiracy might have its claws deep in the world she had once known, but Eleanor wasn't ready to give up yet. She wasn't ready to let it end like this. The last few weeks had changed her, had changed everything, but one thing remained clear. There was always a price to be paid for the truth. Sometimes the cost was too high. Sometimes the truth was something that could never be fully understood. And sometimes you had to fight for it, no matter how much it tore you apart. Eleanor closed her eyes, the weight of the phone in her hand grounding her. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. And as the screen of her phone went black, a final message popped up, one she hadn't seen before. The message was brief, cryptic, but it sent a chill down her spine. "It's not over. You're not the only one looking for answers." The world outside seemed to darken, as if the weight of the unknown was pressing in all around her. The door to the past was closing, but the door to the future was wide open, full of questions, full of shadows, and full of something even darker than before. And as Eleanor stood there, alone in the silence of the room, the question that lingered in her mind was the one that would never leave her. How far would she go to uncover the truth? Her answer, she knew, would define everything that came next.